All right, Liz, thank you so much for being on Talk to Transforms. What a pleasure to have you here today. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I'm a little bit tired. It's been a lot of running around for the last few months, but I'm thankfully healthy and blessed to be here, to be honest with you.
I'm glad to hear you've been traveling a lot back and forth to Israel, haven't you?
Yes, yes. I just came
Yeah.
back yesterday morning from
Well,
being married.
thank you with the time change and the jet lag and all that stuff. Thank you for taking the time out to help transform some people. So I have a few questions for you. Where were you on October 7th?
So on October 7th, I was in Tel Aviv.
Wow.
I had landed on the 6th in the evening. I had gone to Jerusalem. It was the Erev, the evening before Simchat Torah. And so I was going there. My daughter lives in Israel. She lives in Tel Aviv. And I had arrived and she was busy that night. So I went with a friend, with some friends to Jerusalem, where we went to a dinner with a large American Israeli family. And we went to a temple, to Shul, and we danced with the Torah. And
Wow.
it was a beautiful evening. And, like Jerusalem was just alive with energy. And then I went back to Tel Aviv to my hotel. And at 6:30 in the morning, we heard a bomb alarm siren. And so we went to the stairwell because that's where the security spaces are for people when they're visiting. And, we went back a few times. And around by 9 o'clock in the morning, I had started to hear that something was happening along the border with Gaza. So I called my sister-in-law because she and her family, she and her two daughters and their families lived on Kibbutz Kfar Aza, which is right along the border.
What are their names? What are their names?
So my sister-in-law is Shlomit Moore, and her daughters were Liron and Smadar. And so I called Shlomit, and I didn't reach her. But then I called a sister-in-law who lives in Tel Aviv. Her name is Nira. And I said, what's going on? And the first thing she said, and this is all in Hebrew, she told me that Smadar and her husband and their baby, who was a little girl, had been murdered by Hamas terrorists. I'm learning this while standing in a stairwell with strangers, with beautiful people, but not with anybody I knew. Then what we learned was that really the border had been attacked. And what we started to hear, which was through people on the kibbutzes, is that they would lock themselves in safe rooms if they could. But there were 3,000 terrorists, 3,000 people that came into Israel with the one plan, which was to murder, attack, destroy. And so in our family's case and on this kibbutz, there were hundreds of terrorists. Everyone who could get the information, kibbutzes have like a central, like a WhatsApp. So everybody was told, like, get in your safe rooms. But in our case, my niece who lived at a house, her house was right on the corner, right? Like from her front yard, you can look across and see the Gaza City. There's a big field in between, but it's not that far and there's nothing obstructing it. So very early in the morning, terrorists had entered her house and murdered her. And the 6 and 9-year-old son and daughter were in the house. Their lives were spared, and they ran outside where their father was, with this little girl named Abigail, who was 3 years old at the time. And they started to run, and terrorists shot and killed him. The 6 and 9-year-old thought, as Abigail was under him, that she had died also. So they went home and locked themselves in a closet for 14 hours. So we, at that point, believed that Abigail had been murdered with her father. At the same time, my other niece and other family members and this kibbutz, they were in their safe rooms for 29 hours.
Oh my gosh.
Some people's safe rooms were not, they weren't safe in them, and they were either shot at through the safe rooms. The safe rooms were opened. They were murdered. Some of the houses were burned. Some of the houses, and I've been to the kibbutz since, you could see bullet holes, grenades, strips of homes that were burned, destroyed. And what we learned a few days later, because of eyewitnesses and because they were able to clear the kibbutz, we learned that Abigail had indeed survived. This little 3-year-old had come from under her father's body, covered in his blood, to a neighbor who she knew, because it's a community, everybody's a neighbor, and they're almost like a family.
Sure.
And she went to their neighbor, and this mother and her 3 kids, they were locked in a safe room, closed into a safe room with Abigail, and the husband had gone out to defend the kibbutz. And what we learned is that he was injured and did not come back right away. But Hamas terrorists, many of them, entered this house and opened up the safe room, and she was taken with the 3 kids and Abigail as hostages in Gaza. And that was all we knew. That's all we knew. We did not know where they were, any other details, but that they had been seen being marched off the kibbutz. So, for me, it was very obviously personal. This is family. I'd spent a lot of years and times on this kibbutz celebrating and just being with family, but I was in Israel when it happened. So it just was, it was terrible. And at the same time, I was locked in my hotel, so I couldn't go anywhere, but everything was happening so close and so nearby.
It's actually it's just amazing and difficult to hear, and actually just hard to believe that something in this day and age would actually go down like this. How has this how long was Abigail hostage before you actually had proof of life, that you knew that she was still alive?
So this is what you need to know. There's no proof of life. We have not had proof of life. Today is the 98th day. So Abigail was released on November 26th, 2 days after she turned 4 as a hostage, an orphan hostage in Gaza.
Jeez.
And the one thing that people need to understand is that we are not getting any proof of life. Hamas has not been clear who's alive, who's dead. They have marketed people who have been, saying, help us, help us. They've done videos. They've said people are dead who then showed up alive. They've said people are alive who then were dead. We really don't have detail. The Red Cross, the International Red Cross, has not been granted access, even though we have gone to them time after time from all these different venues of families. There were originally over 250 hostages. And we have gone to them and we have asked them, and they do not have access. Hamas has not granted them access to see the victims. And we know that many of these hostages, and keep in mind, these are people that were living along the border, but they represented over 30 nations. They still do. Wow. And different religions. So they're not
Let's talk about that for just a minute. Let's actually just talk about that for just a minute. So let's talk about the profile of these hostages, the age, the nationality, the gender. Where are these people from? Some people think, oh, this is just a Jewish thing, an Israeli thing. It's much more than this. Talk about this for just a minute.
Okay, so there's 2 things. First, there was a release. There was a humanitarian release that took place at the end of November, where Abigail and other children and women were released, a little bit over 100. There's still currently over 136 hostages. Wow. We know that not all of them are alive, but their remains are in Gaza with Hamas. Having said that, we know that there were many Thai workers. There were people who came from Africa to learn agriculture who were butchered and murdered that day, as were Thai, and taken as hostage. So we have international people that weren't even Jewish or weren't even coming to be residents, but just coming to work and learn. But within the communities, you had over 30 nationalities represented, including we still have 6 Americans that we believe are alive.
That are still hostage.
Are still hostage and are alive. But there were also over many religions, Christianity, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhists. So it isn't just about Jewish. It isn't just about Israel. It's really about a humanitarian international crisis. And that's one of the things I like for people to understand, that these are real people. They could be your sons, your daughters,
100%.
Your grandparents. And going back to your question about who they are, well, a lot of the girls and women and mothers were released, but there are still young women who are from 18 to their early mid-30s that are being held hostage. We don't know anything about them. We've heard atrocious stories of what has happened to women, both on the October 7th and since. And we have no idea where they are. We also know that one family did not get out, which was a child who was 1 just turns 1 this week, and 4 years old. Their last name is Bebis, and the mother, the father, and the 2 little ones were kidnapped on the 7th. We have no sign of life. There's been stories they're alive, they're not alive. We believe they're alive, but we don't know anything. Having said that, we have people in their 80s, men who are grandparents. One man in particular, whose grandson I met, his role over the last years was to go into Gaza and bring sick people, children and adults into Israel
Wow.
for cancer treatment. And his wife was released, but he wasn't. And all he did during his life was to help these people. And
Build
so,
bridges.
yeah, and so you have people, and mostly men now, because it's really come down to mostly men, and in addition, these young women that I've talked about, and their grandparents, they're in their 70s and 80s, and they're still held hostage. So other than, like I've said, if there's a video that comes out, when this first group of hostages left at the end of November, beginning of December, we knew signs of life for people they had seen, but many they hadn't. So we don't know anything. These people are somewhere in tunnels deep under Gaza. We don't know anything about them.
It's hard to get our mind around. I was able to meet one family while I was there, and when I met with you as well, there was actually a Muslim family, and his name just slips my mind at this point. But aren't there Muslim families also that have been impacted by this as well? Can you speak to that for just a moment as well?
So there are Muslim families, there are Bedouin families that were from those communities in that in the southern, part of Israel along the border with Gaza. They have lost lives. They were butchered. These are Bedouins. These aren't Jewish. They aren't people that had any animosity. They were just people working in those areas, living in villages. And in specific, I met one father who came to America and was talking about his son. And his son was just another young person in taken away. Again, knows nothing about him. This father doesn't speak English. He speaks Hebrew, he speaks Arabic, and he represents a community that was devastated as well as these kibbutzes and small towns along the border.
Thank you for sharing that. One thing that a lot of folks have asked me, because they've seen that we did the interview with you, they've seen that I've been to Israel. How's Abigail doing, by the way? How's she adjusting?
So look, she's 4 years old. She is a beautiful, really intelligent child. She spent 51 days somewhere.
Wow.
in a few different places. And the one thing that I prayed that she was with this mother and her 3 kids. And she did stay with this mother and 3 kids. And this mother took care of her like her own child.
Thank God.
So, but remember, and all hostages have been under the guard of Hamas terrorists with machine guns. So they're not at leisure. There's at least 3-4 guards, Hamas terrorists, watching them at all times, whether they're in the tunnels or they're in apartments or they're in empty buildings, they're being patrolled. What we've learned from most of these kids and women that have come back is that they were silenced. They weren't allowed to speak. So while they're not getting fed, they're not having medicine, they're being given salt water. And, you hear stories that either get a quarter piece of pita bread or a piece of pita bread. That's not what a 3-year-old, 4-year-old child should be eating, let alone any adult.
No.
So when we talk about how Abigail is doing or how these other kids are doing, remember, they were told they could not talk. They had no cell phones. They had no screens. They weren't like our kids that get to, or how they were before, where they're entertained and they get to run around and they get to play soccer and they get to dance. I mean, these kids were put in a small section and told not to speak. I don't know, telling a 4-year-old not to speak, not to be free. So that was that has been devastating for all of these, children that usually should be alive and joyful. What I can say about Abigail is that she is safely with family. She did not come home because her home was destroyed. She did not come back to her parents because they were murdered. But what she did come to was her sister and brother, and that is just in this dark, dark time, at least a beautiful silver lining, that this 6 and 9-year-old got their little sister to come home, and they are together. And the 3 of them are now with my other niece, who is from that kibbutz, who is this beautiful woman who's lost her little sister, her best friend, And she and her husband are now raising 6 children with my sister-in-law Shlomit and her husband very nearby to help them. And so the one thing that I can tell you is we don't know what the long-term ramifications are for any of these children. But what I can say in Abigail's story and in many stories is there's just lots of love. They have good families. These families are so, like, amidst this tragedy, having their hostages and their loved ones come home is the blessing. And society in Israel is such that there is so much support from neighbors and from community. And look, they all are going to be in therapy. They're all going to have, whether they're an adult or a child, what they struggle with. And, you know, we don't know the long-term ramifications, but we know that if a family can provide love and support and warmth for a child, that is the beginning of ensuring that they have the potential for a beautiful life.
Agreed. Thank you for that. What are you doing now? I know you've got your hands full with what you're doing now. What, as a result of this, what have you launched into, and what is the project that's on your heart, and what is the goal that you're trying to accomplish right now?
Okay, so the number one goal is to get this 136 people, these 136 individuals, innocent people home. And to do that, I'm not a diplomat, I'm not a politician, I'm not a military expert, so I can't and others cannot go in and tell everybody what to do, even though we'd like to.
Sure.
I'm sure many of the people on this call would like to drive over there, pick them up and bring them home, but 100%. We can't do that. So what we can do, and what I hope others will do as they're listening, is keep telling these stories, keep telling the truths, because a lot of people are trying to whitewash what happened, say it didn't happen. I can tell you, being the family member, knowing that it did happen and that it is going to be part of the family's trauma for the rest of their lives. So for us, it's real. So when you ask, like, what can people do? No, what I can do. And what I'm doing is, look, Abigail came home on the 51st day. I have that miracle of Abigail, this beautiful little girl coming home to the family. But what happened on the 7th, it changed all of our worlds and changed mine. And this other 250 families, as you work together to release their hostages, and I've specifically worked a lot with these American families who had children that were in Israel or families that were in Israel, members, you become a family with them. And it's not the family you chose, but it's the family that now you have for the rest of your life. And so I've continued, even after Abigail was released and all these women and children were released, to be like an advocate, to keep saying, I am in solidarity with you and I will do everything I can, which means we go and speak with leaders, we go and speak with organizations. I'm speaking with you all today and with you to really keep making it like out there so that the people who are doing the diplomacy, whether it's the US government that is over, you know, in one corner trying to make sure that it happens through Israel and through Qatar and through other regional partners, whether it's speaking with Qatari officials who are doing most of the negotiating at this time, whether it's all of the work we're doing to make sure that the Israeli government puts these hostages first. They have a lot to take care of, because what happened on the 7th can never happen again.
Never again. Can never happen again.
But in implementing what they need to do militarily and security, I truly believe that the return of these hostages is what has to happen, and alive and right away, because they've been there in 2 days. It'll be 100 days.
It's hard to believe.
We need to bring them home. And so that's really been my effort. And, you know, one thing that I'll say is, like, when we learned that she was alive and that she was a hostage, I saw her picture and I looked at this picture of this beautiful little child and I said, I'm going to bring you home. And I did everything I could, and I did not stop. And these families now who are still doing it have been doing it double the time, 100 days. And so they are exhausted. They don't eat, they don't sleep. Their loved ones, some of them went injured. Some of them went without medicine. And we are doing everything we can to keep putting the pressure, because this is about how it breaks, how we go back to the pattern that let out over 100 hostages 6 weeks ago. How do we do that again? And so what we can do and what people can do is write to their Congress people, write to their senators, keep up online. There's Hostage Forum, which has free art, which is all about freeing these hostages now. They need money, they need support, but what we really need to do is just be advocates that these are real people whose lives were squashed and they are kidnapped and they are hostages somewhere in the dark in Gaza. So everybody has a role to play, but one of the greatest roles is to continue telling these stories so that the truth does not get whitewashed.
I appreciate that so much. Because you travel so much, you've got family there, and I've traveled there many times. Just for a moment, talk about the climate and the impact this is actually having on Israel economically, in terms of everyone I've talked to, literally every person I spoke with in Israel knew someone that had been impacted somehow, some way, whether it was directly or indirectly, whether it was an IDF soldier, whether it was someone had been taken hostage, someone had been injured. Everyone somehow was being affected this way, and now they're at war. I just think like, okay, these folks have not had a chance to grieve. Now they've had to go to war. It's simultaneously they're having to have a sword in one hand and maybe a handkerchief in the other hand. It's like how are these people doing this? How are they so resilient? And is it a matter of just sheer necessity at this point that this has to be done? But as far as the climate's concerned and just what you see, how much has Israel changed now that there's a real 100-day war that we're talking about here?
Yeah, there's a lot of answers to what you've asked. First, I think that the country is in stress and trauma. Think about that on the 7th, there were over 300 young people who were slaughtered at a music festival.
Jeez.
So 300 people from Israel and from other countries that had come together, dancing all night like any young person would want to, my own children, your own children. And when I say children, I'm saying young adults.
Of course.
But they were dancing, they were slaughtered. Those 300 young people, my children who live and don't live in Israel, knew some of them. Israel's a small country. So you could probably talk to just about any citizen of Israel and they would have a relationship to one of those young people there or somebody that was living in one of the communities along the border. So it is very emotional. And everybody is understanding that there are, still 130 hostages. It's as if their hearts are still in Gaza with these people. So it's that unknown, it's that darkness. And so what I do know is, look, Israel is very resilient. It's always been very resilient. And one of the things that it does is come together. That is one of the most beautiful parts of the people of Israel, is they come together and they do support each other, especially in these really dark days. But it's hard. It is really hard because one of the things that Hamas has in their platform, and one of the things that they have been very verbal on Arab TV, is that they will go back and do this again. Yep. And what I need people to understand is, like, while this is Israel we're talking about, this is not only about Israel. This could be, God forbid, any of our neighborhoods in America, in Europe. And not that I'm trying to be scary or catastrophize, but really this was peaceful.
It's the reality.
And these terrorists had a plan, which was a jihad. They want to make this a caliphate where everybody follows their rules. And what I think people need to understand, and this is where sometimes this miscommunication of what stories and what truths are, is that if you really do look at what Hamas intends to do as a terrorist organization, and they have said it, it's on Al Jazeera, it's on different foreign radios and TV, it's like their goal is to come back and do this again. Yep. So when you live in Israel and you know that this is something that is true, it makes life also really hard. You've now had a war. You've lost the most amount of people you've ever lost in one day as a population, as a Jewish population, since World War II, since the Holocaust. And they're telling you we're coming back. And any loss of life is terrible. So I want to be very clear. Like, for me, the war on both sides and innocent people being killed is terrible. But I just go back to that on the 7th of October, there was a ceasefire. On the 6th of October and the 7th of October, that ceasefire was broken by Hamas terrorists. So where we are now is that Israel must defend itself, but Israel also must bring home these hostages.
100%. One of the things I want to ask you about as well, since you've mentioned the kibbutz, Kfar Aza, and I know there's many others that were affected as well. In terms of people, there's been literally thousands of people that have been displaced. I know there's issues in Palestine as well. And I do have sympathy for folks that have been displaced. But I think we're not hearing also that there have been thousands of people still in Israel that are living in hotels, that are living, in, temporary setups.
Yeah.
Children are going to temporary schools. My friends at Yad Vashem, for example, they're housing 300 students, just to have a school and a place for these kids to have some sort of normalcy. I mean, the whole country's sort of upside down. I mean, this is nothing that Israel wants. They didn't want this. I mean, again, they were celebrating a holiday at the time, and it's like, they didn't ask for this. And so, I just think it's really important that people do understand that this is not something that, Israel's not just poking a bear looking for a fight. This is something that, this is a matter of necessity, and they have to fight at this moment, because if not, it's a matter of life and death, situation here. So, but in terms of the people, how many people have been displaced? Isn't it like 20,000 people?
I think it's more. So first,
More.
I want to say that, when you and I met, was it 2 months ago? A long time. It was back in the beginning of December.
That's right.
In Israel, and you saw the devastation and you saw the destruction firsthand, and you were there to volunteer. We haven't gone that path. We have not moved forward. We're still in that place.
Jeez.
Because one of the things that we all know is, until these hostages return to their loved ones, we're stuck. We're stuck in this moment, which is this in between. The war is going on, but these are real people. These are real family members that really prevent the entire country from moving forward. So I want to bring that up. The thing that I know, and you have to understand, is like, on that day, the amount of people that were displaced from their kibbutzes, from their communities, from small towns, is a couple 100,000.
Wow.
And they are in different temporary housing, in hotels, in apartment buildings, in their families' homes. The people from Kibbutz Kfar Aza went to Kibbutz Shvaim, which is north of Tel Aviv, staying in their hotel. And different members are trying to find places to stay with family in Tel Aviv, in Ra'anana, in different places. And then you look, and that's just one kibbutz that had such devastation. But there's others, and there's towns along the border that also had to be evacuated. And now you look at the fighting that's taking place in the north from Lebanon with Hezbollah, and thousands of people in the north have been taken out of their homes because it's not safe to be there. So while we talk about displaced, not one person should be displaced. This isn't about a false equivalency. But if we just look at Israel, what happened since the 6th of October is you have hundreds of thousands of people that aren't in their home and cannot go home, either because it was ruined or because it's no longer safe.
And for some of these may never, for sure. And some of these may never ever be able to go back to some of their homes. Is that for sure? Like, it looks like some of these areas may never be rebuilt.
Some of these kibbutzes, especially, like, these people are so afraid. Do you, if your home in your neighborhood was completely attacked and you were a hostage for 29 hours, you lost a family member, another family member was kidnapped, your cousin was missing. I mean, and then you say, oh, we rebuilt it, come back. You have ghosts. I don't know how you go back. Some people can.
I agree with you.
But I don't know how you go back, because one of the things I understand is everyone now is trying to figure out how you go forward. And I'm not sure going back to that kibbutz, and this is me just speaking personally, works for so many of these people who need to go forward from this tragedy and trauma and one of the most horrific days in world history.
Absolutely. Liz, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I wanted to ask you, what can we do to support you? What can we do to support your efforts? Is there anything that we can do to come alongside and amplify your message, and what is it you're doing?
Well, first, thank you. I think you coming to Israel, and if others have the opportunity to come to Israel to volunteer, just to show your heart and your humanity and support, I think that is amazing. But if you are in the States or you're somewhere else and you can't get there, you can tell the truth. You can tell stories. You can go to really just Google these hostage stories, understand them, and share them. Because what we need people to understand is these are real people. Yep. They are stuck somewhere in Gaza. They are somewhere in the dark. Look, there's opportunities to donate to help children. There's opportunities to help donate people who are on these kibbutzes. If there is an ability to send money, please do. It's not hard to find really good organizations like the Jewish Agency that's doing good work. There's Christian groups that are doing really good work. I don't want to be specific because I don't know what everybody,
Sure.
their passion is, but there are ways, and money is important. The other thing is to write your congresspeople, to write your senators, to write your local legislators, and really say to them, do everything you can to amplify that these are hostages. These are real people. They could be our family members. We've got to get them out. You could reach out to the Red Cross if that's your, if you donate to the Red Cross, the International Red Cross, or if you support them, because they're not getting these hostages information. They're not getting them medicine. They're not being able to attend to them. And that's a real crisis. And the last thing I'll say, which is pray, give your heart, do what you can, and be kind to one another. Because at the end of the day, the only way we're going to get through this, even in America, anywhere in the world, is if we are kind to one another. And I know that sounds like maybe separate from what's going on, but I do think that there is something about like the heart and the humanity of all of us that we can share, which also has small ripple effects, but can be big waves as it continues. So I'm a cautious optimist that I think we all can make an impact, not only here in our country, but in Israel. And I just say thank you, because you're giving us this opportunity, this opportunity to talk about our family, which just represents one of many that are really still suffering. And really, we live a tragic future because of where we came, but your support and your attention is really is heartwarming, and it brings a great light at this very dark time. So I want to say thank you, and keep helping us, because this is something that once we even get our hostages and these loved ones home, we still have plenty of work to do together.
Still a lot of work to do. I agree with that. And I just want to say thank you for your boldness. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for investing your time, money, effort, your life into bringing these people home. We want to bring them home now. And Liz, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I'm sure we'll be doing something again in the future.
I look forward, and I hope it'll be under better circumstances with these people.
I do as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless. Thank you so much.